We're continuing our study of the Sermon on the Mount, or at least continuing that reading. And it's all part, as we started last week, with the discussion around the absurdity of Christianity, or the Christian absurd. And so today we continue on after last week's readings of the Beatitudes, which talked all about the blessings that we have as God's people. And as you remember, we shared the image of the blessings that we provide for others, the blessings that come through us that help make the difference in the world. And so that story continues in the reading of Matthew 5. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its salty taste, it cannot be made salty again. It is good for nothing, except to be thrown out and walked on. You are the light that gives light to the world. A city that is built on a hill cannot be hidden, and people don't hide a light under a bowl. They put it on a lampstand, so the light shines for all the people in the house. In the same way, you should be a light for other people. Live so that they will see the good things you do and will praise your Father in heaven. Amen. This is a photograph of the chapel which is on the Mount of Beatitudes in Israel, in the region of Galilee. This is the traditional or mythological site that people hold to where Jesus did the Sermon on the Mount, where he proclaimed the Sermon on the Mount. It was on this hill. And so the church, being the church, has done a wonderful job, of course, of totally building up everything around it to let us know that this was this sacred place of Christ. And the chapel that you see there was built in 1938, so it's not an ancient one, it's not a very old one. But the thing that I found that was really quite fascinating about the chapel was that it was built by a group of Italian sisters, nuns, an order of Italian nuns. And they built this chapel to honor God and to give glory to the meaning of the Beatitudes, the meaning of blessings, that Christ called to care for each other and all of that stuff. They wanted to emulate that through this chapel. The really fascinating part about it, though, was that it was funded by Mussolini. Go figure. So someone who would be, partners with Hitler in some of the worst atrocities that were soon to follow was also funding the building of chapels. Anyways, when you come to the Mount of Beatitudes, the first thing you come to is a huge parking lot with plenty of room for tour buses. If you get there early enough, there's only 6 or 7 tour buses there. If you come a little bit later in the day, there's dozens. And the tour buses, all line up one after the other, and you get off, and you have to remember where your tour bus is because it's such a mash and schmozzle all through there, you have to make sure that you know where it is. But in order to get to the chapel, in order to get to the Mount of the Beatitude, you have to walk out of the parking lot and past the souvenir and food stands. Now, it's not tacky. Totally. In the sense that, it's not a whole bunch of, merchants hawking their wares or whatever. It's a couple of souvenir stalls and a couple of food stands, which tells us that you may be coming to this mount to be blessed or to find blessing, but it really is money that makes the world go round. And so you will come and look at your keychains and your snow globes before you get to the Mount of the Beatitudes. And then as you walk up the pathway, the thing that I found the most intriguing about this site, and it was one of the most intriguing sites that I visited for the wrong reasons, was the fact that when you get towards where the mount is and all around the chapel, everywhere that there is grass, there are signs. Any idea what the sign said? Keep off the grass. Here you have this image of Christ preaching this sermon on a hillside. The people spread out on the meadow before him, listening to everything that he says. And when you get to this place, you keep off the grass. So it's an intriguing image that I wanted to share with you, because it's one of those examples that we have as Christians in the world where we live under the illusion that we can keep God and our ideas of God and our beliefs about God all carefully contained. Where we can have the whole idea about who God is and what God's message is for us neat and orderly and structured just the way we want it. Almost in the fact that you would think that the 11th commandment in the Bible would be, keep off the grass. And so, when I started thinking about doing the sermon or the sermon series and study series on the absurdity of Christianity in the 21st century, I wanted to talk about this image of the chapel, that although beautiful, and no doubt it provokes feelings of spiritual strength and encouragement for people, and the setting really is a beautiful setting. It overlooks the Sea of Galilee. There's wonderful paths to walk along, but it is all carefully tailored. It is all carefully manicured and looked after. And you don't do anything that offends that. You don't do anything that upsets that harmony, that sense of perfection that the worship orders, the religious orders are trying to achieve in terms of looking after this spot. So we create the idea that we can somehow contain our ideas of God, our beliefs about God, within these carefully manicured settings. And that continues even to today. I mean, it's not anything that's new. It's been going throughout history. Even our ancient and biblical images that we hold to, the ideas about God that we have in our heads, are all images that were intended to help us place God within a context that we could grasp, that we could at least understand. This is who God is, and this is the picture that we have of God. And so, whenever you think about God, even as mature adults, even as people who've been thoughtful and reflective about what you believe about God, about who you know God to be, about how you've experienced God within your own life, when you are asked to think about God, you almost inevitably get this image of an old man with a big white beard sitting upon a throne surrounded by clouds. It's just a natural image that we have. And you might think that there's a magical nature to that image, that you might think that it's something that helps us at least grasp the whole idea of God. Except the reality is it's just an attempt on our part to make God palatable, to make God understood. And it's that absurdity, that ability to try and take what is wondrous and grace-filled and astounding and beyond comprehension and turn it into something that you can buy keychains and snow globes for, that is truly absurd. Our ability or inability to try and contain the image of God. Now, no wonder the world around us has come to the point where it disregards much of what the church has to say. The world around us has reached the point where the church really has become quite irrelevant to the daily functionings of people and society. And part of it has to do with that attempt on our part to create an image of God, an idea of God that is carefully crafted and perfectly contained and controlled by what we think and do. And so when we go and you see this a lot, especially in the United States, and especially within the last few years, where you see lots of church people making grand proclamations about the things that are God's will, or the things that God believes, or the things that God calls us to do. And in almost every case, those things are exclusionary and often hate-filled and very often prejudicial and life-denying. The number one issue in the United States right now, the number one issue is not health care. It is not the war in Afghanistan. It's not the war on terrorism. It's not the desperately underfunded public education system. The number one identified political issue in the United States is same-sex marriage. That is astounding to me. That a nation that proclaims God as so central to its identity would create a massively divisive issue and make it the most important thing they are about. The world looks at that. The secular world looks at that. And they do not see an honorable debate. They do not see a desire on the part of the church to communicate the love of Christ. Instead, they see prejudice and hatred and division and exclusion on both sides. This is not something where those who support gay marriage are good and those who don't are bad, or those who don't are good and those who do are bad. This is a case where both sides are living in extremes of division and hatred and prejudice. And it's absurd, and the world looks at that and they have that as their image of God. Because we've spent so much time as the church carefully crafting God to look like us, to be like us, to be tailored and managed and cultured to be like us, that the world doesn't create distinctions. It doesn't go and say, well, this is the words of the Christians saying this. It's not really God saying this. That's not how they see it. The people of the world around us look and say, this is what their God says. This is who Christians are. And the problem that I have with that, the thing that frustrates me so much, is that then all Christians get tarred with that same brush. Because there is no distinction. Christians are Christians are Christians. And so the Christian who has a radical viewpoint that might be prejudicial and hate-filled and divisive is seen the same as Christians who are loving and accepting and embracing. It's in the same way that, you and I might have when we hear the words of some Islamic fundamentalist who stands up and spouts vitriol about the Western world. Do we listen to that and think to ourselves, that's just one person's opinion? Or do we think to ourselves, that's Muslims for you? All Islam thinks that way. So the question then becomes, what do you do about that? What do you do about this carefully structured, manicured, keep off the grass, absurd notion of God? Well, that's where the power and significance of the Sermon on the Mount comes into play from my perspective. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its salty taste, it cannot be made salty again. It is good for nothing except to be thrown out and walked on." You are the salt of the earth. As I was sharing with the children, the spirit of life in glorious potential. But if you become absurd, if the world sees you as valueless or immaterial or negative or irrelevant, then you are good for nothing. You really are good for nothing, except to be ignored. If we stop being salt, if we stop being that which gives life, if we stop being that which continually learns and questions and thinks and challenges and explores what it means to be the people of Christ within the world, we become stagnant and lifeless. We get trapped into our views of one thing or another and are unable to see our way clear to seeing anything any differently. We become absurd to the world and absurd to ourselves. And Jesus continues, "You are the light that gives light to the world. You should be a light for other people. Live so that they will see the good things you do and will praise your Father in heaven." The key phrase, indeed I would even suggest it is the key phrase within the whole gospel, is this: live so that others will see the good things you do and will praise your Father in heaven. When the world witnesses the church being who Christ called us to be, that is when they witness God in our midst. The church is meaningful and relevant to the world when we minister with compassion and grace and justice to people seeking love and acceptance. When we live out our faith through these good things, the world actually sees an image of God that is no longer absurd. An image of God that is not naive or superstitious or divisive, but is an image that is instead life-giving and effective and present in the people of the church. Live so that others will see the good things you do and will praise your Father in heaven. Or perhaps, to put it another way, the good things you do, the integrity of purpose you live by, the love and compassion that marks your mission to the world is the image of God in the world. We move Christian faith from the absurd to the desirable when we're able to help others see love at work in our midst, rather than hate, rather than prejudice, rather than divisiveness. When we are intentional in our efforts to share love that is meaningful and relational, we actually help the world see God as meaningful and relational. We are the image of God that the world sees, for good or for bad, for purpose or for absurdity. If we speak a gospel of exclusion and hate, or live in ways that exclude and exploit, that is the God the world expects from us, and quite rightly will reject. If we speak a gospel of welcome and acceptance, and live in ways that embrace and support, that is the God the world will come to expect from us. And perhaps, just perhaps, come to value. Live so that others will see the good things you do. Because when you do, they may indeed appreciate that this is God's purpose for humanity. When we live in Christ-like ways, the world will praise the life-giving presence of love of God within the world, because it is evident in us. And that's not absurd.